Oh yeah.
We'll see. Um, if you haven't already met her through some of our previous sessions, this is Emily Barker, one of our lovely colleagues who is running Reuse Minnesota. And we wanted to bring this session to the summit because we've touched on rebate programs, voucher programs during previous years. Actually, if you go to last year's summit recordings, which you can get to through the summit page, I hosted a session with Lauren from Repair PDX down in Portland, and a recorded offering from Christine Ganapini from the Restarters and Right to Repair program in the EU, talking about France's and a few of the other countries' repair rebate programs. So it's been, sorry, Emily, I don't want to like rain on your parade or like go into too much detail, but
You're good.
this process has been inspired by some early work in Austria that initiated a repair voucher program for their citizens. So with that, take it away, Emily.
Awesome. Thanks, Cami, and thanks everybody for coming. Get my screen here. I am excited to share about this. You're actually the first folks I presented to about this. We did this in June and the summer just disappeared. So here we are talking about it. As Cami mentioned, I'm with Reuse Minnesota. We are a nonprofit based in Minnesota, as you might guess, and we are a member-based organization, but we do a lot of work outside of supporting our members. We do education work, we do public outreach and legislative advocacy work as well. And we are mostly government funded, and I bring that up because this specific project was funded through a money that we have in Minnesota that's the Environmental Natural Resources Trust Fund, and it's legislatively designated funds that actually comes from our lottery. Lots of folks have different feelings on lotteries as just generally the ethics of lotteries. But that said, my kind of thought is if we are going to have them using the funds to pay for environmental work isn't necessarily a bad thing. So the money that comes through the trust fund is a big, long process. You apply for it and it takes almost a year and a half before you ever actually see dollars if you get there. And it's approved by the legislature. So the bill, it actually goes through the legislature as like a thing, a bill, and is approved by that. But because it's a bipartisan process leading up to that, it usually, short of total implosion in a legislature, there is usually approval of that. So we are very thankful because we have had several projects, including my position, actually funded by this funding or by this money. So this was one of our final projects that we had with this grant that ended in the mid-year. So background, the funding we had was a larger grant that included a lot of things, but it had a portion of the budget that was set aside or kind of earmarked to test and implement social marketing strategies to drive or change consumer behavior. The focus was wide open. And as we kind of process to see like, what do we really want to motivate? Like, what's our goal? What are some things that we'd really like to see? We came on this idea of let's try out something related to repair. And as Cami mentioned, I had read an article about the French textile repair program and thought that'd be really interesting. And I hadn't seen anything in Minnesota that had ever been done like that before. And our grantor was amenable to offering a rebate that this funding, fortunately, they were willing to let us do that as an option of way to spend the money. And so we moved forward with it. Now, full disclosure, the way that this went down, and we're a small nonprofit of 2 people, was that it was a good idea for a long time. And then as often happens in grants, it all came like rushing to a very fast end. And so the actual implementation of this was not the timeline I would have preferred. It ended up being a little bit rushed, but I think we still got amazing results given that. So how our process worked, we offered a rebate where folks had to do a purchase or do a rebate or do a repair. And then they could submit a survey and a copy of their receipt and receive up to 60% of the cost, up to $75 back in a form of a rebate as a check. And so this is the little poster, the flyer we had created, and we had postcards that we put out as well. And so pretty straightforward process. I'm going to share the results of the questions. Each individual question was pretty straightforward. All of our questions were mandatory except for the barriers. If people didn't have barriers, we didn't want them to necessarily like make them up, but every single question was mandatory that folks answer in order to actually receive the rebate. So we got pretty good responses because of that. A few notes about eligibility and restrictions. So we wanted this to be pretty wide open in terms of what people could submit a rebate for. Even though the inspiration was taken from the textile repair program, we really wanted it to be a wide open thing. So we included any sort of clothing, shoes, small appliances, sports equipment, electronics. You can see the list there. And that's not an exhaustive list. That's just kind of like the examples we gave. We had a few restrictions. So we did not include home repairs. So anything that was like physically attached to your house. So we actually had one rebate that was submitted for a garage door repair and said, sorry, that's not what this is about. We also didn't include vehicles or large appliances. So if it was a refrigerator repair, that wasn't going to be included. And we weren't doing any vehicle repairs, partly because we felt like most people are going to get their vehicle repaired, you know, if it's small damage, or a lot of what's done is the basic maintenance, which we also weren't interested in focusing on right now. So like, you know, oil changes and things, we didn't want people to start submitting those. So we just completely left out vehicles. And generally basic maintenance also wasn't included. So like knife sharpening, we did have a few people inquire about that, because our goal was really about repairing things. Now, I recognize that knife sharpening is part of keeping those things in good working order, so people will use them, but it tends to, again, be one of those things that people expect to do when they buy an item. They know they're going to need to do that, versus something where something breaks, stops working unexpectedly, or unplanned, that we really wanted to inspire that change, or that behavior change. Few other things about eligibility is it was just open to Minnesota residents, and the items had to be repaired by a repair business in Minnesota. So we are in the Twin Cities metro here. We're very close to Wisconsin. And so the whole goal of this, the funding and the goal, was to support Minnesota businesses, Minnesota residents. So that was our parameters there. We also did not reimburse for self repairs. We actually had somebody who submitted a receipt for a vacuum cleaner piece they had purchased months before the rebate, and and they said, we did the repair ourselves. And I said, well, that's again not the goal. That's laudable, and I'm very glad that you did that, but the goal again was to support repair businesses. And then we allowed up to two rebates per household. They did have to complete one survey per each repair so we could have that individual data. For this program, we promoted online via email, our various social media channels, to our members. So again, we're a member-based organizations, and some of those businesses are repairs. We said, please, promote this to your customers. We didn't, it was open to any repair shop, so they didn't have to be a member of ours to be eligible, but we especially wanted our members to take advantage of it. Promoted in person. I did some traveling to Duluth and Red Wing, which Red Wing's south of the metro, Duluth is north. And so try to get out there and actually physically stop by some shops, drop off some postcards, promote to the local communities. We received 168 survey responses, which again, given that literally this was about a 3-week program, I was pretty astonished that we got so much response, and pretty happy with that. We issued 157 rebates. We did have a few where the folks did the survey but never submitted the receipt, and we'd reach out a couple times, and after that point, it isn't worth our time to keep reaching out. And we did have a few ineligible expenses, as I mentioned. We issued about $7,800 in rebates, and that represented over $20,000 of repairs. So the actual value to the economy was over $20,000, and then we helped offset that or pay for some of those costs. About a third, a little over a third of the costs that were expended on this. Items that we had repaired: mobile phones, clocks, chairs, e-scooters, shoes. We had a few upholstery type things. An electric guitar was pretty cool. Pants, jackets, and a lot more. There was a whole long list of things, but those are some examples. Getting into the direct survey responses, we asked a variety of things, both about this specific repair event and activity that they did, and also generally what their kind of attitudes and feelings about repair are. So for how easy or difficult it was to find the repair provider, most people said very easy. Now, if I'm honest, probably need to attribute the high percentage of this to the fact that like some folks we know, just based on how some of the data came in and how some of the responses came in, folks had already taken their stuff to a shop to get repaired and then found out from the repair shop that this was happening. And so they had already located it. And so it's kind of one of those things, maybe if somebody said, "Oh, I have this broken item. I've heard about this repair. I want to see if I can find a repair shop," that percentages may have changed a little bit. But either way, I was quite happy that the majority of folks felt like they were able to find something. In terms of whether or not the repair prevented the purchase of something new, this was a key metric for us because for obviously the goal of repair is really to keep things out of the trash and more importantly, to keep new things from having to be prevented or produced and purchased. But uh, we also recognize that some people have things fixed that are, maybe an antique or an heirloom item that they wouldn't have replaced anyway. And so, they were, a vintage clock or something like that. They wanted it working because it was special to them. It's from a grandparent, but they wouldn't have gone out and purchased a different one that belonged to someone else. So that might be where some of the no's are coming from, but the vast majority were yes. Repair satisfaction, we wanted to know, were you happy with the repair that you had done? And fortunately, the majority of people were pretty satisfied. Only a couple not at all. Did the rebate incentivize the choice to repair? And it's kind of interesting, as I mentioned, because some folks we know, like they maybe had already taken the item in before they found out about it. Some said, I would have had this repaired regardless, but a good portion said that, yeah, it definitely did, or that it definitely had some impact and maybe I would have done it later, but this got me motivated since there was a timeline. Most people were located in the Twin Cities metro, unsurprisingly. And that kind of sets the back of the brain mindset for how far people had to travel. So most people are traveling in that 1 to 5 mile radius, which isn't totally surprising. We did a secondhand shopper survey as well this spring, and that's kind of the same radius that a lot of people were willing to travel to buy secondhand. Obviously, there are some folks, or if you're in rural areas, you're going to probably have to travel further, especially for specialty repairs. You maybe have to come down to a larger area to get things repaired. Or if it is a specialty item, like we had a couple of those clocks get repaired, there are not a lot of clock repair shops, at least not compared to, electronics repairs or things like that. So people are traveling further for those things. But fortunately, a lot of people, the vast majority or the large portion are able to stay fairly close to home. Age was the only demographic question we asked, in part because I'm not a fan of asking demographic information that has no really large relevance to what we're trying to understand. But we felt like age, because there's all these kind of articles you hear about, Gen Z or millennials or boomers or Gen X, like who all has these different like motivators to do different things, that it was kind of interesting to see. And I love the fact that we had such a wide range of ages. It's almost like a bell curve if you were to put it on that. Obviously not a ton of underage or under 18 age wise, but quite a few people in every other age group, which was really great. That's inspiring to me anyway, to see a lot of different ages wanting to get things fixed. The next question we asked was a combination of preset answers and then open answers. So we asked people what motivated them to repair. Unsurprisingly, cost and saving money was at the top of the list. This, oftentimes a repair can be less, not always, but depending on what the item is, it can definitely be less than buying new. But really close behind was supporting small businesses or local businesses. And that to me, I have this in my takeaway slide, but that to me is one of the most important results because it does tell me that people want to support small businesses, and repair is a fantastic sector that is really hard to export, right? Like so many of our other jobs, manufacturing, other things, repair in many ways is inherently local. And so, I've had certain things like I've got Chacos, for example, I've sent out for repair and received back, but repair more than many other things is very easy to keep local and support those businesses. But those two things were great. The other thing I think is interesting here is we asked about whether reducing waste or reducing natural resource, so like upstream and downstream and upstream, was a motivator. And it was almost a 60% difference in the number of people, or 20% difference between the number of people who selected waste reduction, so the stuff they threw out, versus reducing natural resource use. And again, I mentioned this in my takeaways at the end, is that is fascinating for me as somebody who has like a biology background and kind of been in government solid waste for a long time and now in this work, that oftentimes we have been told for decades that we all got to worry about what we put in the landfill. And I'm not just here to discount that. We definitely should be conscious of what we're throwing away. But so often the environmental impact of products is that upstream impact, and reducing that natural resource use is a much bigger benefit than reducing what we throw in the trash, ultimately, when you look at environmental impacts. And so I'm really motivated to see that number change and to see more people motivated by that reduction of natural resource use and the reduction of upstream pollution and those types of things as a motivator to repair. So my personal goal is to see that number go up. You can see on the right-hand side here some other additional things that people wrote in. There was definitely some sentiment of, the item that I have, they don't make them anymore. They don't make quality things like this anymore. So I wanted to fix. That is very true with furniture for sure, but I think that's true in other categories as well. Restoring functionality for something they needed upcoming, just general desire to keep things out of the trash and keep them working. Barriers to repair. Somewhat funny, but not unsurprising, is that cost is not only the greatest motivator, but it's also the greatest barrier because, of course, for certain categories, cost is high. I mean, textiles in particular are a good example of how repair or alterations, things like that, can cost almost as much as the garment itself because of fast fashion and how little we pay for textiles these days. So cost is definitely a barrier. Time is the other big one. And, that's not a fault of thrift store or of repair shops at all. It's just a reality of the fact that many of them have way more work than they can keep up with. There aren't people being trained here in Minnesota. I am repeatedly disappointed by the fact that we have no real on-ramps for young people to get involved with repair-based jobs, things like that. We have a bicycle repair program and an instrument repair program, but beyond that, like we don't have any collegiate level, university level programs to incentivize that. And so I think time is a huge thing that we all need to be thinking about. And of course, I think many of us probably are, is how do you get more people into this sector so then you can have more repair shops, so you can have more people who can move things more quickly. Because unfortunately, when we're competing against new stuff on Amazon, time is of the essence in many ways. Some other additional things that people wrote in on the side. Some people just feel like they lack the skills and knowledge to do themselves, which of course many of you are helping decrease that lack of skill and knowledge space. The bottom one was really interesting to me, that concern about whether or not a repair shop will ruin my item and still charge me. And this is a legit concern. If you don't know, if you don't have a direct recommendation, I had this happen with a pair of shoes years ago, and I was really frustrated. I ended up paying a lot for something that just was not good. And so I think that's a hard thing. Oh, I just realized how far along we are. I forgot what we were saying. Oh my gosh. Anyway, some more incentives. I'll get to my takeaways. People want to repair stuff. If you want to do a rebate, a few things I have. Don't do little checks. We were sending out some $6 checks, and I've been chasing some of those like for months. It was ridiculous. Determine if the repairs are already in process, whether you want those to be eligible. One big thing I'm thinking of when I ask for additional funding is setting a rebate tiered amount, which I set up here. So like if it's this range of a tier rebate that you've spent that, this is how much you get. And so those are some different recommendations. I'll share these slides, Cami. Sorry about that. I was not paying attention.